What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the stack. Welcome back if you've been here before. We're coming back for the fourth video in the Hammertime series. Sorry, this has been so broken up. I'll get into some stuff in a moment about how we're going to be doing the modern series from here on out. It's actually a recording issue, not an editing issue, which surprised me. But yeah, we're playing Hammertime. If you don't know how that deck works or kind of how it's supposed to be played, check out this link because that's going to bring you to the first video in the Hammertime series, which is round 1 of this event. And I go over a little bit more of how the deck works and maybe how you're kind of supposed to play it. Our opponent this game is Jake Morley. We've played against him twice so far, and he's playing 5-color Niv to Light, a Yorion pile, which Jake really likes playing frequently. How it works is kind of simple. It uses the card Niv Mizzet Reborn, and it uses the card Bring to Light to go get Niv Mizzet Reborn and put it on the stack when he can't find it because he's playing an 80-card deck. And then Niv Mizzet fills his hand back up. So he's this grindy, attrition-y, kind of mid-rangey control deck, and he tries to flood out the game with value. Now, as far as the scheduling goes for the games, we initially planned to have each Modern Series video, so a deck, an event, all 4 videos come out in 1 week. The issue with that is I think we're going to run out of modern decks very quickly, and it also creates a weird issue in my weekly day-to-day where I'm just recording a little bit too often. So we're going to start releasing games 1 and 2 of an event on 1 week, and then the next week we'll release games 3 and 4. So that'll be 8 modern videos a month, which should be hopefully good for you guys, and it'll mean I burn through the modern catalog a little bit slower. I have access to like every deck, but even with that, we'll be done with all the modern decks in the format by the end of the year. Given we can branch out into other formats, and we do plan to, and we can always go back and revisit other modern decks, which is something we're definitely going to do, but I don't want to do it too quickly, and I don't want to burn that flame like too hot, too fast. So bear that in mind, but that's everything you should need to know before going into the first game of round 4. So without further ado, Game 1. Game 1, we roll dice and Jake's are higher, so he's on the play, and I'm keeping a 7-card hand that, in retrospect, is actually quite bad. It's 2 Marsh Flats, 1 Blacksmith's Skill, 1 Seachrome Coast, an Urza's Saga, Inkmoth Nexus, and an Esper Sentinel. If I could give one piece of advice, it would be to not keep any 5-lander with this deck, regardless of the fact that 2 of my 5 lands here kind of act like spells, but this does not actually look very good. I'm still trying to figure out why I kept it. Turn 1, Jake starts by shocking in a Temple Garden, dropping to 18, and then plays Abundant Growth onto his Temple Garden to draw a card, and then he passes the turn to me, so I'll play a Seachrome Coast, play Esper Sentinel, and pass back. Jake's gonna play Wooded Foothills, fetch for a Savai Triome at sorcery speed for some reason, dropping to 17, and then he's gonna Prismatic Ending my Esper Sentinel, not paying for the trigger, so I draw a card, and he passes. I'll play Urza's Saga, trigger the Saga, and pass the turn back to Jake, who's gonna play Verdant Catacombs, fetch for a Breeding Pool, and shock it in, dropping to 15, and drop Teferi Time Raveler, but in response, I'm gonna cast Blacksmith's Skill, targeting Urza's Saga, and then he's gonna ticket the Tef instead of taking it down on my Urza's Saga, because now it's hexproof, and pass the turn. In my first main phase, the Saga's gonna trigger, and it's gonna get another counter. Then I'll play Arid Mesa because I've only top deck lands so far and pass the turn. Jake is going to minus the Tef to bounce the Saga, but in response, I'll fetch for a Plains, dropping to 19, and make a Construct. Then Jake's going to play Renin 6, minus it on the Construct to deal damage, that kills it, and I'll pass the turn to me where I'll play another Urza's Saga, trigger the Saga. This time I'll play Stoneforge Mystic. The trigger's going to get me a Caldra Complete, a questionable decision given the position I'm in, and then I'll pass the turn. Jake's going to tick up Ren to get his Catacombs back from his graveyard, and then he's going to play Verdant Catacombs. He's going to plus the Teferi. He's going to cast Kaya's Guile, and the modes are going to be I sacrifice a creature and he makes a 1/1, then he's going to pass the turn. I'm going to trigger the Urza's Saga. I'm going to play another Urza's Saga and try to pass the turn, but at the end of my turn, Jake's going to fetch for a Ketria Triome, dropping to 14, and we'll go to his turn where he takes up Ren to get Catacombs back once again and drops Omnath. The Omnath's ETB trigger goes off and Jake draws a card, then plays the Verdant Catacombs as his land for turn once again, triggering the Omnath's first landfall ability. He'll gain 4 life going to 18, then he'll fetch for a Snow-Covered Swamp, dropping to 17, but he'll trigger Omnath's second landfall ability and add white, blue, red, green to his mana pool, which lets him cast Niv Mizzet Reborn. He's going to trigger the Niv Mizzet, grab a ton of gold cards from the pile, and then he's going to bounce Saga with Teferi, but in response, I'll make a Construct. It really doesn't matter because Jake goes to discard, and then I untap, upkeep, and concede with like 8 lands in my hand. Why did I keep this hand? It was awful. We're going to game 2. Going into the sideboard, we don't want to trim too much from our deck as we have a pretty good natural matchup to 5-color Niv to Light, but we want to trim some cards for 5 pretty good cards in the matchup out of our sideboard, including 2 Lavinia, Azorius Renegade. We really just want this for any Solitudes we might encounter in the matchup. We want 2 Metallic Rebuke because Jake's deck has a lot of creatures and Spell Pierce cannot counter creatures, so it's not quite as good, and we want to bring in 1 Sword of Fire and Ice because the protection colors that it offers are quite good in the matchup. We want to cut 1 Pure Steel Paladin, 1 Springleaf Drum, 1 Colossus Hammer, 1 Spell Pierce, and 1 Ornithopter. There's really no huge rhyme or reason to these 5 cuts. I just want to lightly trim on my 4-ofs in order to make room for these sideboard cards. I was absolutely thrashed thrashed in the first game, so we get to be on the play for the second game, and we're both keeping 7-card hands. This time, my hand looks very good. I'm keeping a Sigarda's Aid, an Esper Sentinel, 2 Colossus Hammer, 2 Marsh Flats, and 1 Springleaf Drum. I'll lead off on a Marsh Flats fetch and shock in a Hallowed Fountain, dropping to 17 because my life total is not a resource that's going to be heavily pressured in this matchup, and I'll drop Esper Sentinel and pass the turn. Jake's going to shock in Overgrown Tomb, dropping to 18 and play a Utopia Sprawl onto the Tomb. He can't pay for the Esper Sentinel trigger, so I'm going to draw a card. He's going to name white for the Utopia Sprawl and pass the turn back to me. I'll play another Marsh Flats, fetch for a Plains, dropping to 16 and drop Sigarda's Aid. Then I'm going to cast Colossus Hammer, triggering the Sigarda's Aid, and I'll put the hammer onto the Sentinel and attack for 11, dropping Jake down to 7 and pass the turn, where Jake just drops a Reflecting Pool and passes the turn back to me. I'm going to play another Marsh Flats, attack Jake for lethal, but Jake's going to channel Boseiju, targeting my Esper Sentinel, and I have no recourse for this action, so I'll just get a basic Plains out of my library, and then I'll play a Stoneforge Mystic. The trigger is going to get Reality Chip, and then I'll fetch for a Hallowed Fountain, shock it into play, dropping to 13, and pass the turn back to Jake. Jake drops an Abundant Growth, targeting his Overgrown Tomb, and then he's going to draw a card off of the trigger. Then I'll play Prismatic Ending, targeting my Stoneforge Mystic. I have no response, so it gets exiled, and he tries to pass the turn, but at the end of his turn, I'll flash in the Reality Chip, and notably here, even though the chip is a 0/4, it does not have Defender. So on my turn, I'll head into combat and attack with the chip. He declares no block, so I'll flash in Colossus Hammer, attach it to the chip, and then Jake dies 2 lethal. We're going to game 3. We're happy with our sideboard plan, so there are going to be no changes going into game 3. Jake's going to be on the play, keeping 6 cards, and I'm going to keep my first 7. That's going to be a Marsh Flats, a Seachrome Coast, Sigarda's Aid, a Basic Plains, Arid Mesa, Esper Sentinel, and a Pure Steel Paladin. Although this hand looks a little bit land heavy, the non-lands I have are quite brutal, and there are a ton of top decks that make this hand quite lethal very quickly. Turn 1, Jake's going to drop a Snow-Covered Swamp and pass the turn, so I'll play Seachrome Coast, and for the 3rd time, lead on Esper Sentinel and pass the turn back. Jake's going to play a Snow-Covered Forest and pass. His mana's looking very awkward at this point. I'll head into combat and attack Jake for 1 with the Sentinel, dropping him to 19, play a Basic Plains, cast Lavinia, Azorius Renegade, and pass the turn, where Jake just plays a Prismatic Vista and passes back to me. So I'll drop a Plains, play Sigarda's Aid, attack for 3, Jake declares no block, so I'll flash in Colossus Hammer, trigger the Sigarda's Aid, and target Lavinia. It works, but before damage, Jake is going to fetch for a Snow-Covered Mountain, dropping to 18, and terminate Lavinia. That means he's only going to take 1 damage and drop to 17, and then I have to pass the turn. Jake drops Boseiju as his land for turn, signaling that he probably has no lands left in his hand. Then he purchases Yorion from the Companion Zone. After that, I'll pass to me, so I'll drop an Arid Mesa, attack for 1, dropping Jake to 16. I'll cast Pure Steel Paladin, and I'll follow it up with a Giver of Runes and pass the turn. Jake's going to draw and try to pass right back, but at the end of his turn, I'm going to fetch. In response to the fetch, Jake's going to Abrupt Decay my hammer. This works, so I'm going to get a tapped Hallowed Fountain off the fetch, and we'll go to my turn, where I'll cast Steel Shaper's Gift and go grab a Sword of Fire and Ice. Then I'll attack Jake for 3. He declares no block, so I'll flash in Sword of Fire and Ice and attach it to the Sentinel. That's going to trigger the Paladin, so I'll draw a card. Jake takes 5 off of damage, which triggers the Sword of Fire and Ice, so I hit Jake for 2, dropping him to 9. I'll draw off the sword, play Marsh Flats, fetch for a Plains, and pass the turn. Jake's going to play a Snow-Covered Forest, pass the turn, and then I'm just going to kill Jake. He has no tricks, and we have lethal. We win this game 2-1, meaning that for this event, we went 4-0.
About to go in. Oh no.
My nipples are abnormally large. What the fuck? I'm so good at Hammertime this match.
Oh no.
It's mine. It doesn't even matter if your deck's tier 1. Stoneforge. You're done. You channel Boseiju to knock out my threat. Too slow, you're dead. The Solitude's gonna stay stuck in your hand, cause I got Lavinia and I got a second land. Preach. That's right, take notes. Hammertime is the best deck in Modern. I've been telling y'all this whole time, haters gonna hate. Sigarda's Aid, Stoneforge Mystic, Urza Saga, Basic fucking Plains. Basic Plains. Colossus Hammer.